Welcome to the Principles of Performance podcast, where we discuss how to optimize your health, fitness, and performance. Drawing on decades of experience of working as coaches, consultants, and trainers to top performers, athletes, and teams from professional sports to top universities to the U.S. military, Eric DeGatti and Mike Perry discuss topics and strategies of how to perform at your highest level and be your very best. Join us and our friends and colleagues who are leaders in the fitness and performance industry as we investigate and challenge the most popular training, nutrition, lifestyle, and recovery protocols. And away we go. Here we are with the Principles of Performance podcast. I am your host, Eric DeGatti, along with my friend and co-host, Mike Perry. And we got a topic today that I'm pretty passionate about, Mike.
Yeah, no, you are. I feel like you're going to be just scribbling notes the entire time, and I might have to take over. No, this is going to be a good one. This is in your wheelhouse today, Eric. That's for sure.
Yeah, in our course, we have a whole section that I do on just recovery and readiness, and a lot of it I constantly refer to this book, Good to Go, and we're lucky enough to have the author of that book with us today, Christie Aschwanden. She's the author of Good to Go, What the Athlete and All of Us Can Learn from the Strange Science of Recovery, and she's the co-host of Emerging Form, a podcast about the creative process, and she's a lifetime athlete herself. She's raced in Europe and North America on Team Rossignol Nordic ski racing squad. She's the former lead science writer for FiveThirtyEight and was previously a health columnist for the Washington Post. She's a frequent contributor to the New York Times, and she's been a contributing editor to Runner's World and Bicycling, and she's appeared in dozens of publications. And you'll find out all the stuff on the bio that you can see in the notes. But I can't wait to get started here with Christie. Welcome on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So let's dive right in and start by kind of telling what got you intrigued into looking deeper into the science and also the business of the current recovery market.
Sure. I'm really glad that you mentioned the word business, because that's a large part of it. And we can get to that in a minute. But my interest in this really stems from my own experience as an athlete. I'm retired from serious competition now and have been for quite a while. But I look back on my career as an elite athlete, and I realized that the thing that sort of held me back the most was recovery. It was something that I sort of understood too late in the game, the importance of it, and really, look, I'm happy with my athletic career and all that, but when I look back and think, what could I have done better? It's recovery. And it's really interesting. While I was researching the book, I talked to so many professional athletes, both current and retired, and this was a recurring theme. It was something that, I think some of this is that when you're young, when you're in your 20s, you have a lot more resilience. As you get older, recovery becomes more and more important. And I think athletes come to understand as they go on in their careers just how important it is. And I think a lot of people have these regrets, like, oh, I wish I would have given it, more credence early on. So that was kind of part of my interest. But then the other thing that happened is that in the years since I had retired, what I noticed, and I still do all these sports. I'm very active. I'm still sort of in the game, just not doing it at a high competitive level. And what I've seen is that there's just been this influx of businesses and marketing around recovery. And so recovery has really become a product. It's something that is being sold to people as, something that they can purchase or that they can have services for and all of that. And so I really wanted to dive in, as a profession. I'm a science writer, and I really wanted to dig into the science and say, does any of this stuff really pan out? How strong is the science for this stuff? Is this something that we all need? And, what works and what doesn't?
Cool. And I know Mike's got a follow-up to talk about kind of the industry and the business of all this thing, but and I'm obviously familiar with your work, but to endear you to Mike, I know there's a story that this all kind of started with studying beer, which hopefully we can get back to, which will certainly warm Mike's heart.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I'm a beer lover. A lot of my runner friends are as well. And I actually designed and carried out a study to look at the effect of beer, post-exercise, post-running beer on recovery. And it was really interesting. And I think, this is actually the first chapter of my book. that describes this study that we did. And, I was involved in putting it together. So we really did our best to try and design a good study. But at the end of it, I realized that I didn't really trust the result. And I think it was really a good exercise in understanding how fraught it can be, interpreting some of these research studies on athletic performance, because it's so complex and performance is so complex, and it's very easy to get a misleading result that then you can go run with and really market. And so the takeaway from our study was that beer was great for recovery in women and it was terrible for men. And if you're like me and you are a woman married to a man, this is great news, because you can say, okay, honey, no beer for you, you're a designated driver, this is me
It's
recovering.
science.
Yeah, but of course it really, I understood very easily that this was not a result that we could put much credence in. And in the book, I really go through, some of the reasons for that and the lessons that I think that offers for how we should interpret scientific results.
So don't give up,
Very
Mike.
cool.
You're N of one. I would keep going.
Right. And I
There's
think,
hope. There's hope.
Yeah, that's one of the big lessons. And I think as I was researching this book, I became very disillusioned kind of with some of the science in the performance space. And this is not a diss on the researchers who are doing this. These are very hard problems that they're studying. There's a lot of variability, natural variability in our physiology. And so it's very hard to sort of pin down some of this stuff. But one of the fundamental problems that we have with a lot of these studies is that they tend to be very small. And I mean, so small, a typical study might have 12 people, and that's just too few people to really be able to draw any kind of definitive conclusions. And, when I take these studies to people in other fields, researchers in other fields, they just kind of laugh, like, how is this acceptable? And there are reasons for it. It's very difficult to put on some of these studies. You have to bring people into the lab and they undergo a lot of testing and whatnot. So it's not that the researchers are trying to do bad research. It's just that sort of the way the standards of the field have been for a long time have not been rigorous enough to get good answers. But this is something that's happily changing. There's now a movement within the field to sort of do more rigorous research and to overcome some of these problems. But it's challenging and it's not something that's going to be solved overnight. But I would just counsel people, if you're looking at a study about performance or exercise, and there is, 20 people or 12 people, I think you have to be really careful about really interpreting much from that. It may or may not have any relevance.
But then how are we supposed to cherry pick all the data and, make it sound like we know everything?
I know. Yeah.
All right. So when we're talking about recovery, how big of an industry has recovery become, and why do you think that's the case?
Oh, I think it's the case because, everyone's looking for an edge. And again, like I was saying earlier, as you get older, this becomes more important. So it's sort of a growing industry. Every athlete is getting older every year. And so they're realizing, oh, I need to get better recovery, and what can I do? And so I think it's also an obvious thing, training is stuff that athletes have to do. It's harder to sell products on that, although of course there's plenty of products around training. But I think it's just sort of open for that because there are these things, and the promise of it is so alluring because it's something, especially you can do to give yourself an edge. And yeah, this is a multi-million-dollar business easily.
Now, some of that is there's much higher public consciousness about it with the rise of people like Andrew Huberman and Peter Attia and so forth, and even people like Joe Rogan, promoting different recovery modalities. But in terms of vetting, like, okay, what actually works, and that's what the book does a really elegant job of, kind of looking at what has some actual significant and substantial research behind it. Are there any modalities that stood out to you as you went through them that really had the best solid research? And on the flip side, is there any that it doesn't match their popularity and the research behind it in terms of having that big gap?
Yeah, well, that's easy. And I guess I just want to start by saying there are a lot of people that have podcasts out there on performance. And I would just say anyone who is also selling you a product. So if they're telling you how great supplements are, and by the way, you can buy them for, such and such, or they're running those ads, that really, that is a huge red flag. I just think you can dismiss that kind of nonsense. And I have a whole, when you ask what's something that doesn't work, very easily, the really easy answer there is supplements. I have an entire chapter in the book sort of outlining why supplements are so problematic. One of them is just that they don't work. There's very little evidence for any of this stuff. And even the things, that people say, really work, the evidence is very, very flimsy. So for instance, something like creatine, which is not used so much for recovery, but for performance. There've been a lot of studies done on that. These small little studies, it's very easy to design a study that will look positive when you use these sort of bad study designs. But supplements are also problematic for another reason. In the book, I outline multiple athletes who are actually banned from competition because they inadvertently ingested a banned substance through a supplement. And there's this idea that you can vet the company making the supplement, and well, I just get supplements from the good companies, but the supply chain comes from all the same places. A lot of this stuff is manufactured in China. You're getting it overseas, so it's really hard to be able to really know what you're getting. And this isn't regulated. A lot of people don't understand that there's not a lot of regulation around supplements. There's very little policing of it. Every day almost, I will get notices from the FDA of where they found supplements that have, for instance, one common thing will be performance supplements that will have some sort of banned drug in them. So basically it's like probably someone's trying to offload this drug they can't sell anymore, so they put them in supplements. And so the stuff may seem to work because it has a dangerous substance in it, but they really can be bad for your health. I have an example in the book of a swimmer who actually missed the Olympics because she tested positive for a substance that she ingested from a supplement she got from her sponsor. So that's another thing that I'll say about supplements is that almost every athlete these days is sponsored by some kind of supplement company. And so you can say, well, you have to take supplements to be an athlete, or you can say, well, this is how athletes are funding. The sort of fundamental way that athletes are paid is a little bit broken in this. So we're given this idea that these things are necessary because they're being paid to tell you that this stuff works. And I think you need to be really careful. Any athlete who is on the Olympic sort of circuit who's being drug tested, knows that there are a lot of things, they're going to be very careful about what they're ingesting, because as an athlete, you are responsible for what goes into your body. So anyway, supplements, I would just say hard stop. If you're a woman who's menstruating, you may need iron, but again, you need to test. You don't just decide that that's the case, because there's also a condition of iron overload. And in fact, I know an elite runner who had this happen. She thought she was low on iron, so she started taking iron. It was getting worse and worse. And it turned out that she had this genetic condition where she was, her body was storing too much iron, and some of the symptoms can be the same. So that's the thing that you should stay away from. It's just a really easy, hard no. Save your money. It's not going to help you. The thing that really works the best is something that doesn't cost anything. So that's good news, right? And that is sleep. It is really hands down. I mean, there's just absolutely nothing that comes close to sleep when it comes to recovery. And so a lot of people will say, oh, they kind of dismiss this, well, sleep, I already do that. But the thing is, so many athletes don't prioritize sleep. And I think this is something in our culture that's very widespread. People, they don't put the kind of priority on sleep that they need to. They are skimping on sleep. This is especially true of high performing, you'll have these executives that are also doing Ironman or something like that, and they will be getting by on 5 hours of sleep, and they are just wrecking their recovery. The thing that was really interesting that I learned while researching the book, this is fascinating, is that people who are chronically sleep deprived basically lose their ability to notice their deficiencies. And so they basically get pretty good at coping with the deficiencies. And so they become invisible to them. So they say, oh yeah, I'm fine on 5 hours of sleep, but really they aren't. It's like, you may think you're doing okay, but if you were to actually get the 8 or 9 hours that your body wants, you would be so much better. And you just don't know that because you've never done it. And I think it actually takes some effort to make sleep a priority and to get this good sleep. And, sometimes people have trouble sleeping, and there are a lot of things that you can do. Even just, most of these things are very simple fixes that don't cost a lot of money. Making sure your bedroom is an appropriate temperature, keeping the light out, things like that. So there's a lot of things that people can do, but it's one of the things that people dismiss and get wrong most easily.
All right. So we've talked about sleep and the importance of it, but we also want to talk about another thing, which is hydration. And in your book, you definitely, bring out some facts that sort of push against some of the long-term or long-held beliefs. Talk about hydration and why the common guidelines aren't really that good.
Yeah. So basically what's happened is we have a bunch of companies that are marketing hydration products, and they've really, Gatorade has an entire research program that they fund, the Gatorade Science, what is it called? Gatorade Science Center or something. Sorry, I'm getting the name incorrect, but they fund a lot of research. And when you fund research, saying hydration, looking at all the ways that hydration is important, you're going to find all the ways that hydration is important, but you may be missing the forest for the trees. And so it turns out, from a physiological perspective, your body is very, very good at handling a little bit of dehydration. So when you exercise, you're going to be losing some fluids. This is why your kidneys hold on to water. There's a whole feedback mechanism with hormones. I don't want to get into the physiology. It's a little bit boring. But basically, our bodies are designed to be able to cope with some fluid loss during exercise. Our ancestors, were not keeling over because they didn't have Gatorade when they were out hunting or whatever. Your body is actually very adept at being able to cope with this. And our bodies actually have a very sophisticated system for ensuring that we're hydrated. It's called thirst. And so there's this idea, and I can't count the number of times I see this in the media. Oh, you can't rely on your thirst. By the time you're thirsty, it's too late. Well, that's actually nonsense. If you look at it from the scientific perspective, if you actually talk to physiologists, scientists who study human physiology, this just isn't true. Thirst is your body telling you that you need to get some fluids into you. And it's perfectly fine to drink to thirst. Now, this isn't to say that you shouldn't be planning. I mean, you need to have fluids available when you're going to need them. If I'm going to go out for a 2-hour run in the heat, I know that I'm going to get thirsty and I'm going to need water, so I should bring some. But this idea that you need to start drinking before thirst, and that you need to really drink to a particular schedule can be actually very dangerous. In fact, there's now a lot of the big races like marathons and Ironman and things like that. The medical teams will actually now assume that if someone is staggering and they're, all of these signs that are also signs of dehydration, they now assume that person is overhydrated, because this problem has become so dire that I was unable to find a single instance of a person dying of dehydration in a marathon or any kind of event like this. But I did find multiple examples of people dying from overhydration. It's actually a very dangerous condition. And it happens because people have been convinced that they need to drink. And what ends up happening is your blood becomes too dilute. You can get swelling in the brain. It's actually a fatal condition. It can be. And so it's really dangerous to just drink according to some kind of schedule. Thirst really is the best metric that you can use. And again, it doesn't mean that you wait till you're dying of thirst and really, really thirsty to drink something. But if you're having to force yourself to drink and it doesn't taste good and it feels like you're kind of choking it down, that's probably your body telling you that you don't need it. But what has happened is, and this is kind of an example of something that happens all across the recovery spectrum, is that you have these companies that have products, and so they're sending messages that are beneficial to their product. So we want you to buy more sports drinks, we want you to buy, and one of the biggest scams are these electrolyte tablets, which cost almost nothing. They have a huge markup. You don't need to take an electrolyte tablet. Electrolytes are just salts. They're found in all of the food that you eat. There's another example of an athlete in my book who was banned from competition because she took an electrolyte tablet that inadvertently, was tainted with something else. So I think, the idea that you need these special things is just marketing, and that's all it is. And I think people need to be able to recognize that that's what it is.
And that marketing machine is pretty powerful, because
it's so powerful.
And we see it, with Mike has kids that are involved in youth sports, and I coach youth sports for many years, to see how quickly you had mom running to the fence with the Gatorade. And it's like, little Johnny did not get dehydrated running 60 feet to first base, 3/4 speed. You don't need to replenish anything right now. So
that's right.
And so even if we want to just a little bit deeper into the hydration, is in terms of what that fluid makeup is, if just plain old water versus needing something more than that, and when that time actually does come.
Yeah, for the most part, you just need water. I think one exception is that, if you're doing a long endurance event, you may need some sugar and things too. Like there's kind of, I think one thing that has been conflated a little bit is that, when you're doing exercise for more than 90 minutes, let's say that's kind of a good rule of thumb for threshold, over 90 minutes, you may start, digging into your glycogen stores. This is the sugar that your muscles use to power themselves. And so it can be very beneficial and performance enhancing to take, sports drink has, in addition to the salts and water, it also has sugar, and that's helpful when you're doing that. And so it doesn't have to come in a liquid, although I think, if I'm doing a marathon, it's easier to drink some calories than to try and eat them sometimes. Gels are maybe kind of an in-between thing. So that's an example of where you need something. Again, if you're exercising for long periods of time, you're going to need some water, and you may start to, crave a salty snack or something like that. I like to say, when you finish your exercise bout, you don't necessarily need to take electrolytes. You can eat a salty pretzel or something like that. And again, your body has ways of telling you it needs this. This is why you have that hankering for, potato chips or something salty. It's because your body wants that. And there are different electrolytes, potassium and whatnot, but we do get these in our foods. And you don't have such a great need that you need this. I mean, this idea that you have to have a perfectly, scientifically validated mixture of something to drink. This is marketing from the sports drink companies and the purveyors of these products. It's fine to just eat regular food and drink water. You don't need all this other stuff.
Hey, everybody, a quick break in the action here. Hope you're enjoying the show, and we appreciate you listening. We're working hard to bring you the highest quality content and best guests every single week. So if you could do us a big favor and go and like and subscribe to the show on whatever platform you get your podcasts on, it would be greatly appreciated. Be sure to listen at the end of the show also to find out more information about our courses, as well as a special discount code for all our listeners. Thanks again, and let's get back to the show. All right, so here we are. Let's talk about probably the trendiest recovery tool that's out there, and it's ironic that it's trendy. Is the ice baths? Because if you read ancient Stoics, talked about doctors prescribing ice baths, but and then a not too distant second to that is using sauna and heat. So talk about what you found in regards to utilizing extreme temperature exposure.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I think ice baths are one of the most popular recovery methods that you see. And you'll particularly see this when a big team like football team is doing training camp and they're all getting into the trash cans full of ice afterwards. And I also have in the book, I have a whole chapter about placebos. And it turns out that placebos that are unpleasant are much more effective than ones that are inert or are pleasant. And so I think ice baths, there's definitely a placebo effect going on here. But it's really interesting. This came as a surprise to me, actually, that it turns out that icing, and cold can in some cases be harmful for recovery. And the effect here is small. I don't want to say like, oh, you're completely screwed for the rest of the season if you take an ice bath, but it seems to actually slightly delay recovery. And if you think about it, we can just do sort of a thought experiment. What is icing actually doing? It's cooling your extremities, right? And so your body shunts all the blood to your core. So you're basically reducing blood flow to those areas, to your muscles that you're worried that you're going to be sore and that you want to recover. Well, that's actually the opposite of what you want, right? Because your blood flow, that blood flow is what's going to help remove waste products, flush things out, all of that. And so icing is really just sort of slowing things down. Now, it also will reduce swelling. And so that's something that can reduce pain in some cases. And so there may be instances where that sort of pain reducing aspect may be helpful. So for instance, if you are in a competition where you're having multiple bouts, like multiple heats or something like that, it might be a little bit helpful. And I'll get to another aspect about this again in a second. But really, it is just slowing down recovery. And in fact, the swelling thing is another thing. Swelling is actually your body's healing process. And so by slowing that down or reducing it, you're actually reducing recovery again. So icing is actually something that's not helpful, but I do think that there's something else going on here. And that is, I kind of alluded to the placebo effect, but while researching this book, I went in and tried cryotherapy. Are you familiar with that? You basically get into this tank and they put some very cold gas in there. Basically feels like you're standing naked in a snowstorm, and it gives you an enormous rush. And I think that there's this other aspect of it. The same thing happens when you jump into an ice bath. You sort of get this and the adrenaline. And so I think that there is a mental and a psychological aspect that athletes might find useful. The cryotherapy place that I went to too, I guess, was really popular. This guy works with the Denver Broncos, and a lot of those players like to go in and do some cryotherapy before the game. And I can understand that physically it's not really helping them, but psychologically it may give them, sort of feeling of power. And so, I think we need to be careful about dismissing things. There may be multiple things going on that can be helpful. So even if from a physiological perspective, it may not be helpful, but psychologically making someone feel ready, that's worth a lot. And I think we need to be sure to keep in mind the psychological aspects of performance and recovery, because they're very important.
So I want to go a little bit deeper into some of these things.
Mm-hmm.
One is, I believe ice baths are more effective if you, and they're actually only effective if you post a video of you on Instagram of you doing
That's
it,
right.
correct? Is that right? It only works if you post it on your
Absolutely.
story.
Yeah. You have to be
But
like flexing your biceps or something too, right?
yes, 100%.
Yeah.
But the difference between cryo versus just doing, cold water and a bag of ice from the liquor store, when you consider the price difference, I don't think, from everything I've seen, there's not a lot of robust data to show any real benefit to the cryo versus the old-fashioned ice, correct?
No, in fact, ice is actually going to get you colder. So the cryotherapy is actually less cold. I mean, it may feel really cold and, all of that, but it's, if your goal is to get yourself as cold as possible, the ice bath is much better because, water is a better conductor than air is.
Okay, so let's talk about the flip side now. Let's talk
Yeah.
about heat exposure and use of sauna.
Yeah. This is an interesting one because I think heat feels really good. So one thing we haven't talked about too much yet is a psychological aspect of recovery. What is recovery? It is basically, allowing your body to return to readiness, do all the things that it needs to rejuvenate itself. And so, it's basically about relaxing and sort of letting your body heal itself. And one of the things I found actually while working on the book is that most recovery modalities that are being marketed are really just things for people to do to sort of give them a sense of agency while they wait for their bodies to heal themselves, right? But I think heat is an interesting example of this because it feels really nice. Like personally, I really like hot tubs, hot springs, et cetera. Heat feels really nice. It does increase blood flow. So there's an argument, I think, to be made that it can facilitate recovery a little bit there. But, athletes don't have a problem with blood flow. So, that's really not the thing that is limiting your recovery. So we could say, well, maybe it helps with a little bit, but the benefit there is going to be so marginal that you probably can't even measure it. I think where it can be helpful, though, is it makes you feel good. It's an opportunity, if sitting in the sauna and relaxing for 30 minutes makes you feel good and gives you a time to let go of all the stresses of the day and all of that, then I think it can be extremely effective. Now, there are a lot of different kinds of saunas, and now infrared saunas are really hot. And there's this idea, there's all this sort of pseudoscience-y language that's used around infrared saunas. And infrared is kind of a buzzword that is found in a lot of these recovery products. And it's just kind of, again, it's a red flag. I think infrared saunas are fine. They're basically saunas that are a little less hot than regular saunas. The heat is coming in a little bit different ways. So if you want a sauna that's not quite as hot, it's fine. If you like the way it feels, it's good. But there's nothing magical or special about the infrared. I mean, infrared is just heat. It's a kind of heat. If you remember from physics class, it's part of the heat spectrum. So there's nothing magical about that. But again, I think, one of the takeaways for me after writing this book is that there are a lot of things that athletes can do that make them feel good and help them recover that may not have a really strong physiological basis, but there's a psychological basis. And I think the psychological aspect of recovery is really important. To really recover, back when I was an athlete, we would recover by putting our feet up and, watching TV or reading a book or something like that. Once a recovery becomes an activity that you have to do in another part of your training, it really becomes a new stressor. And so I think any kind of recovery ritual that you're doing that helps you sort of kick back and relax can be really beneficial. It may not be doing something special in your blood or with your physiology, but there's a psychological aspect to recovery that's really important. And I think one aspect of recovery that athletes tend to really neglect is the psychological stress. If you're taking a rest day and you're running around all stressed out, trying to get everything else done that you didn't do the rest of the week, because you've been busy training, you're not actually resting, you're not recovering, because psychological stress is physiological stress to your body. And I think a lot of people don't recognize how important this is. And so another one of the most effective ways that you can enhance your recovery is by managing stress. And I don't say reduce stress, right? Because we all have, modern life is stressful, but figuring out, effective ways of managing stress and dealing with it so that it's not taxing your physiology and it's not making you tired. If your heart rate is raised because you're stressed out or you're having a conflict with someone or something like that, you're not resting. And so anything you can do to really manage that stress will be helpful. And I think, sauna can be part of that. There's a thing called I call them the squeezy pants, but the massage, different products, those massage pants, there's massage tools and things like that. From a physiological perspective, these aren't doing anything very special. Again, the thing limiting an athlete's recovery is probably not blood flow. And that's really the one thing that these things do is facilitate blood flow. But if that's not the thing that's reducing your recovery, then increasing it's not going to really make a difference. But I think where it does make a difference is if it's something that makes you feel good and helps you relax, that is absolutely beneficial. And it doesn't matter, what it's doing from a physiological perspective.
Well, it makes me think of a conversation, Mike, we were having a couple of weeks back when we were going through the great debate in our industry about foam rolling. And we get a lot of the people will talk about there's not really a lot of hard sciences to say how beneficial it is. But when you look at the low barrier for entry, the low, for a $10 roller, and I say, here's my science, I felt like shit, and now I don't feel like shit anymore after doing it for 10 minutes. Like, so what's the harm in it?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, I'm yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I debunk in the book, but I think there's a lot of stuff where, there's not good science on this, but if it makes you feel better, foam rolling is a great example of this. There's not great science on it, although I think the science is evolving. We just don't have a lot of good science on it yet. That's hopefully changing. But if it makes you feel better, I have no problem with people doing it. And I'd never say, oh, you're crazy, that doesn't work. We don't know. And I think, I would discourage people from spending a lot of money, paying a lot of money, or wasting a lot of effort and sort of stress on doing methods that don't have good evidence. But if there's something like foam rolling that's cheap, that's easy to do, you can do it at home, there's not like a lot of extra stuff, and it makes you feel better, great. Yeah, I've tried foam rolling. I think it hurts. I don't like it. It doesn't help me. But I know other people who love it, and I'm going to be the last person to tell them to stop, because again, it goes to the psychological aspect of it. And so much of it is feeling like, if there's something you can do that makes you feel better and feel like you're more ready, I think that's beneficial. And I won't tell people not to do it, even if there isn't good evidence.
So let's talk about the art of recovery and really what you're talking about is managing stressors and the role of our autonomic nervous system and all that, and how we kind of can gauge that, whether now you have, speaking of an industry, you have a whole industry of devices that people strap on themselves to try to gauge that. But talk a little bit about how much that comes into play and what can we actually do to gauge where we are in terms of being too, sympathetically overdriven versus being in that right even keel.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned wearables, because I think there's a whole industry now around these. I mean, look, I have a fancy sport watch. I don't use all the features on it, but I think data can be really helpful. I'm a data journalist. I'm a data geek. I love data, but I think there's this tendency to want to quantify things. And there's an idea that, oh, if I have this device and it's giving me a number, then that's more tangible, or that's real. And I think one of the most important things that athletes need to develop is their own sort of qualitative sense of well-being. You need to learn, what does it feel like for you to be recovered? I tested out a bunch of different sports watches and devices and wearables while I was working on the book, but a lot of them have recovery scores. Now, all of these things have proprietary algorithms. They won't tell you how it's coming. I mean, most of them are based on heart rate or heart rate variability. Heart rate variability, by the way, is not a great measure. There's a lot of people that think it is, but it really isn't. But these things, what I found is there was a huge amount of variability. I mean, I could be the same person wearing two different watches, and one of them would tell me I was recovered, the other one would tell me that I wasn't. So I think it's really not a great idea to offload this important job to a device. Just because something gives you a number doesn't mean that it's meaningful, and it doesn't mean that it's measuring the right thing. I think that we do have this idea that numbers are better, but your body has a very sophisticated algorithm for figuring out whether you're recovered, and that is, your sense of well-being. And it's interesting, of all of the things, I was really trying to I was hopeful actually when I started working on the book that I was going to find the magic metric. What is the thing that you can measure that will tell you whether you're recovered or not? And I found out that there is no such thing. Individual athletes may have something that's a very good indicator for them, but there's nothing that's universal. You have to sort of figure it out for yourself. But the one thing that rose to the top and that seems to be the best indicator is actually mood, believe it or not. So, when you're overtrained or under recovered, you tend to be cranky, moody, you might be depressed. There are different flavors of this. I had one coach who said, he would gauge overtraining in his athletes by talking to their roommate or spouse and saying, is he cranky or, how's the mood? And I think most athletes have experienced this, when you're tired, you get, your mood is not great. And so that's a really powerful way, but that's not something that can be quantified on a watch or a wearable. And I think, it's really important to understand a lot of these wearables, they're just not as accurate as you might think. And so I think they can be really good for helping you as you're sort of figuring this out for yourself. So you're tracking your heart rate or tracking what it tells you about sleep, but you need to have other sort of checks on that and see, particularly something like sleep. Wearables are not very good at measuring it. There's no wearable that can measure things like what kind of sleep you're in. If your wearable is telling you that it can tell you how much REM sleep you have, unless it has, it is measuring your brain waves, which none of these do, it's not accurate. And I think it can really lead you astray. In the book, I have an example of a person who went into the sleep lab because they were really stressed out because their watch or wearable was telling them they weren't sleeping well. It turned out the sleep was fine. It was the watch that was defective. So you need to be really careful about putting too much credence in it. I don't think it's terrible to use them at all. You can look at it, but you need to sort of check it. Notice when you go to bed and when you get up. And if you're waking up feeling refreshed and the watch is telling you you're not, trust your body, and vice versa as well. If it's saying, I actually had a friend who was really concerned. She had one of these rings, and it was telling her that she was sleeping 10 hours a day. And she said, "It's weird. And it told me I was, in bad shape because I was sleeping too much." And it just turned out that it was inaccurate. And when she went back and started tracking, like when she went to bed and when she got up, it was off by like over an hour or two. So, check these things and don't, put more credence in how you feel than in what some numbers telling you.
Well, one point to follow up that, one of the things we talk about is I do a quick readiness screen with clients, and I explain to them the difference between signal and noise to say, okay, well, if your wearable says you have a low HRV, I'm not going to worry about that. But if you have a low HRV and we do a breath hold test, and then we do a grip strength test, and now we start to see it starts coming up low on all these things. Okay, now we may have some actual signal that you're a little bit down. But one thing, even if it was all three things and it's just one day, I'm not going to freak out about that. It's just a little bit of noise that we're getting here, and it's something to take note of, but not anything to like, oh, I got to stay in bed today because my strap on my wrist said that I'm at 30%.
Absolutely, 100%.
So we're gonna, switch gears a little bit here, and let's talk about the role of breath work and meditation and visualization and stuff like that.
Yeah. I think one of the things that really fell out of my research is just the importance of, I talked about it in the terms of stress reduction earlier, but I think anything you can do to sort of quiet your mind and I think meditation and breath work, these kinds of things can be wonderful, wonderful tools for managing stress. And so I don't think that there's any one universal thing that works for everyone. You have to sort of try it out and find something that works for you. A lot of people find a lot of help with meditation. Other people just can't do it, and that's fine. Like, I don't want you, if you're trying to reduce your stress and you're feeling stressed out because you're not doing your stress reduction technique properly, like that's not helping, right? So you want to find something that works for you. And I think there's a lot of interesting different aspects and different tools out there that can help. But I'm a fan of meditation myself, although I think it's something that you really have to make part of your routine. because it's easy to blow it off and forget, or you say, oh yeah, I was going to meditate this week and I didn't. And I think, one bit of advice that I like to give to people is that it's just fundamentally important that you have a daily recovery ritual. And this isn't just about exercise. It's something, you need a time in your day that is dedicated to just kicking back and relaxing, where there's no expectation of being productive. There's no expectation of anything, where you're just literally relaxing. And this seems so easy. It's kind of sad that we're living at a time where people have to like put this on their calendar or plan for it. But I think it's important, and it needs to be, and again, this is an individual thing. It may be sitting on your porch watching the sunset. It might be, every night before bed, you spend an hour reading a book before, or you go for a walk with your partner. I mean, there are a lot of different ways this can look, but it's really a time when mentally you are unwinding. You're not like monkey brain, and physically, that you're really having some downtime and not stress on your body.
So along those lines, we like to say that we get a lot of our best training and conditioning ideas from outside of that world. And one of the books that really stands out is Dan Heath's book, Upstream. Now, the reason why I love it is because what you just talked about is the first time you really talked about anything proactive, where this is just your routine every day, where most other recovery stuff is reactive, where I beat the crap out of myself and then I run to my Theragun to try to fix that. So how much of recovery really is just having really thoughtful training, that you don't need to run to all these different modalities all the time?
Oh, 100%. I think most of these modalities are unnecessary. And I think the more you can simplify your routine, the better. What if you can take 30 minutes off of your exercise routine because you're getting rid of this nonsense that you don't need, and then you can use that 30 minutes to actually relax and to do something that's more helpful. I think your recovery should not be its own source of stress, but it's really easy with all these products and all of this marketing really creates this idea that there's a perfect way and an optimal way to do all this stuff. And this fear that if I'm not optimizing it, I'm really missing out. But that's just nonsense. There is no, I think optimization can be helpful sometimes, but your body actually is very good at recovering if you just give it time and energy to do that. And so this idea that you have to get everything correct down to the third decimal point, that's just marketing. And I think we need to let go of that. The secret is there is no secret. Master the basics and everything else will fall into place. The athlete who's really mastering things like reducing stress, sleeping well, eating right, they're going to have such an advantage over the person who's running around worried about getting the latest supplement, the latest tool for, doing something to their muscle, the cryotherapy, all of this stuff, because they're really giving themselves what they need to recover. And that is relaxation and time and that lack of stress. Again, the recovery should not be a stressful thing. It should be
And
the
I think it's
opposite.
also important, as we get towards the end here, is looking at the lens at which you're looking at any of these things with. And that, yes, even though it may be effective, or this may be the routine of X, Y, or Z elite athlete, if you're just the casual exerciser, you don't need that. And nor should you be you don't need to train to that level where you're that beat up that you need that much recovery, right? Because you're in more for a long, continuous haul, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting. You have people that are doing, a 30-minute workout on the treadmill at the gym who think they need to go recover for another 30 minutes. It's kind of like the person who's going and eating the energy bar, the big protein shake after, and they can't figure out why they're gaining weight because they're doing all this exercise. Well, it's because you didn't need all of that. And, those recovery foods are fine, but they shouldn't be replacing, your regular meals.
Awesome. Well, this has been fantastic, Christie. We can't thank you enough for your time. So before we wrap up, tell us about what you're working on next.
Yeah, I'm actually finishing up a short run podcast for Scientific American about the role of uncertainty in science. So really excited about that. And I have a feature coming out in the January issue of Scientific American about vitamin D. It's called The Rise and Fall of Vitamin D. So I think it's kind of a good window on how science works and sort of the scientific process.
So we'll certainly have all the links to all the ways you can follow Christie, because she puts out some great stuff. And thank you again for that. And want to thank you all for listening. And this has been the Principles of Performance podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Principles of Performance podcast. If you've enjoyed our content, please like and share on your social media outlets, as well as subscribe and give us a review on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your preferred platform is to listen to. For more information on the Principles of Program Design courses and workshops, visit us at www.principlesofprogramdesign.com and follow us on all of the social media channels where we post new content every day. To save 10% on any PPD courses, enter the discount code PRINCIPLESPODCAST10 at checkout. If you have any questions we can answer or suggestions for the show, you can email us at info@principlesofprogramdesign.com or message us on social media. Thank you again for your support.